Now, the Federal Reserve has, again, they want to keep unemployment at about 3% and inflation at 3%. What is inflation? I'm glad you asked. Inflation is the rise in price of goods and services. And so here we have the goods and the services. So inflation is when things get more expensive. Now, it's all right for things to get more expensive. They can't get too expensive too fast. I love a bargain and I love getting things on sale. But if things get too low in price, then that's called deflation. And that's not good overall. Imagine that the price of all goods at Walmart continue to go down consistently. If they go down far enough, Walmart and the producers that put those items on the shelf are going to make less profit. If they're making less profit, they're going to lay off workers. And if those workers are laid off, then there's going to be less shopping and spending at these stores, less mortgages taken out and less furniture put in there, and less need for construction workers or roads to be built. So all of this is dependent on there being enough meat on the bone for it to go all the way around. So it's all right for prices to go up incrementally. We also see that with real estate in appreciation, not inflation, but appreciation, where the value of your home goes up. And so that's a hedge against inflation. But if you're holding real estate, so that's really good. Prices go down too low, too fast, that's deflation. They go up too high, too fast, that's hyperinflation. Now, when things get hyperinflated is because we're dealing with pressures of supply and demand. I'm glad you asked. Supply. What is supply? So supply is the amount of goods and services producers, that's the key word here, producers are willing and able to produce at a certain price. So who are producers? Well, again, that's us right here. So we're producers and consumers. Supply, think of hamburgers, or think of t-shirts at Walmart or t-shirts at Target. These items, let's switch gears. Think of iPhones. So as long as there's a demand for a smartphone at that price, then producers are willing to step into the market and compete and provide that product because there's enough room for there to be profit. But if all of a sudden the price of smartphones went down to $100 and it cost manufacturers and producers $125 to make an iPhone, then there's no way for there to be a profit. So at that price, producers would not be willing to provide the supply of this good or of a service. If something becomes, if the price of a service goes down as well, then people are going to be less inclined to provide that service. The flip side of supply is demand. So demand is the amount of, you guessed it, goods and services consumers are willing and able to buy or consume. Let's change that to consume at a certain price. Now, who are the consumers? Again, that's us. So we're the consumers. Now, the demand is how much we are willing to buy. So as long as smartphones are at a certain price, consumers are saying, I'm willing to pay this much, I'm willing to go to this amount. But as soon as it breaks threshold, then consumers say, that's way too much, I'm not going to spend that much. We saw that in real estate. So in 2008, prices were going higher and higher. And then the consumer said, you know what, that's too expensive, I'm not going to pay that. There was a correction, and then the prices came down. They came crashing down. So that's the relationship between supply and demand. Now, the Federal Reserve, understanding goods and services and understanding that we are consumers and producers employed by these companies, but also we shop at these companies, right? We solicit and we buy there. The Federal Reserve has two tools in which to, again, the first one we said unemployment. Come on. So unemployment, 3%. Second is inflation, 3%. They have two tools with which to keep unemployment at a low number and inflation at 3% or below. And the first tool is that they can raise or lower interest rates. They can raise or lower interest rates. The second is that they can add or pull back money. And really, I think what the Fed is known best for is printing money. All right. So how does this work? When the Fed sees that the market is flying and money is flowing, people are borrowing, businesses are borrowing, consumers are borrowing, they're spending, credit cards going up, that's in theory good. When it's going too fast, then the price of goods is going up as well, and it's growing too high. If it goes too high, then normal professionals, us, okay, teachers, firemen, school workers, can't afford these high prices because they've gone up too fast. So what the Fed needs to do at that point is to slow things down. So instead of things going double speed, they want them to slow down. In order to do that, what the Fed will do is they'll take interest rates and they'll raise interest rates. When they raise interest rates to these banks will then raise interest rates to consumers and to businesses. So where a business was able, qualified, and ready to borrow a loan to open a second storefront and hire more people and borrow money for payroll and do all of that, they may not be able to qualify for the same loan if rates are higher. So then that means that businesses' growth is slowed down, hiring is slowed down, and because there are less consumers with less income, there are more consumers with less income, then there's less spending. So that slows things down. When rates go up, then we don't borrow as much through credit cards or mortgages or loans because the income's not there or the borrowing isn't as easy. It's more expensive. So the Fed can raise rates. If the banks are still lending, the bank can pull back money that they've lent to the banks. So what the Federal Reserve does, again, they can raise or lower interest rates. If they lower interest rates, then what they're doing is they're making it easier for these rates to be lower and for you and I and businesses to borrow money. And the easier access there is to credit, the more spending there's going to be. That's not always a good thing. They'll pump money into the system. If these banks seize up, they freeze and they get nervous and they don't want to lend money to businesses and they don't want to lend money to you and I, what the Federal Reserve will do is that they'll pump money in by buying bonds. And because these guys are now sitting on top of money, they have to do something with it. They'll work that money by issuing loans out to businesses and consumers. So I want you to think of, let me give you an example. So your grandfather comes to your house and sees you sitting on the couch, and he says, you're just sitting there and you're not doing anything. What's going on? Why aren't you going out and trying something new? Why aren't you being adventurous? Start a business, or try to invest, do something with yourself. And you say, well, I don't have a lot of savings. I'm not sure about the market right now. And so I'm not doing nothing. I'm not taking risks. I'm not going out there and trying to be necessarily really active in the market. So your grandfather says, you know what? I'm going to lend you $1 billion. Boom. And so he puts $1 billion on your lap, and he says, now go out and find something to do with this money. So while you get excited and you think, wow, I have $1 billion, I can do a lot with this, you also get nervous because now you're feeling the pressure of having to pay the $1 billion back. But your grandfather tells you, we're going to call your grandfather Mr. Fed. Your grandfather tells you, don't worry, the loan is at 0%. So you don't have to pay me back with interest. Just pay me back. So that's free money. You can now take that money and you can work it. And then when you work it and make interest, earn money on that, you'll pay back the loan, and everything in between will be profit for you. So in essence, that's what the Fed does with these banks. It'll pump money in by purchasing bonds from these banks. And a bond is a loan. So it loans money to these banks. It makes them flush with cash, so much cash that they have to work it. They have to do something with that. And that's the printing of the money. That's part of the equation to speed things up. But if it moves too fast, things get expensive, people get priced out. If it moves too slow and they get priced out, then we start seeing a peak or a crash in the market. If it moves too slow, then businesses aren't growing. They have to lay people off. And if they're laying people off, then you and I aren't working. And if we're not working, we're not spending. And if we're not spending, then these businesses are hurting again. So too slow is not good. Too fast is not good. So the Federal Reserve is constantly making adjustments with interest rates to try to keep this at the right speed.